the last one, but because it's the best one. So Arthur Green was my doctoral advisor at Brandeis. And I studied with him because I thought that he was the greatest Jewish theologian alive. And I still think that. So we are going to have a chance to go into his thought. We've got one bonus today. We're going to talk about Tzimtzum, which is a word that I imagine everybody has heard of, if for no other reason than it's the name of the boat in the life of Pi, which has had a resurgence. And maybe we'll even get a chance to take a look at a couple of agams. We'll see how the time goes. So let me begin to share my screen about Art Green. So I liked what he had to say. Let me start the slideshow here. So I really appreciated what Art Green had to say in one of his last essays that he wrote. He's alive. He splits his time between Boston and Jerusalem. I had dinner with him about 2 months ago in Jerusalem when I was there. He is still amazingly prolific, busy, writing all the time. But he talked about devoting his whole life to creating a Judaism for adults, right? Without the kind of fairy tale models of what other people have called pediatric religion or pediatric Judaism. The idea of a God who is a Superman intervening and making everything all better for everybody. But still a Judaism that has claims on our behavior, a Judaism that is richly informed by the tradition. And I think for Art Green, that tradition relies heavily on the mystical tradition and Hasidism, which is really where he is spending most of his time as a scholar of Hasidism. So we are going to begin, as I am wont to do, with a little bit of traditional text. And you'll see why we are beginning here. This is from the Talmud. So this is the Talmud's account of the translation of the Torah into Greek in the 3rd century BCE. That is called the Septuagint. It is called the Septuagint. Sept, S-E-P-T, is the root for 7, in this case 70. And the myth is that King Ptolemy put 70 sages into different rooms in his castle, in his palace, gave them the Hebrew Bible, told them to translate this Hebrew Bible into Greek, and the miracle was that Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, descended upon each and every one of the 70 in their rooms. So I guess the Ruach HaKodesh is divisible by 70. In our Talmudic story, it is 72. And they came up with exactly the same translation. Now, the Talmud adds another couple of lines to that story. That story is a common legend. But if you see at the very end, it says, and they wrote for him, for Ptolemy, in the beginning God created. Okay, and that's the King James translation. Bereshit, which doesn't exactly mean in the beginning, it means in a beginning of. The grammar is incorrect, so we don't quite know exactly what to do with it. But in a beginning, Bereshit bara, created Elohim, right? That name of God. So why is that a miracle? Right? Why is that worthy of appending to this legend of Ptolemy and the creation of the Septuagint? If you want to know something from the Talmud, you go to Rashi. And what Rashi says, and I thought it's such nice Hebrew, I thought I would quote it here, Shelo Yomar, right? So that one doesn't say, Breshit Shemu. Breshit is a name, Shemu. Ushter Shuyot, and there are 2 authorities, right? There are 2 powers in heaven. And the first one, Breshit, as a power, created the second one, Elohim. So I want everybody to understand that, because that then becomes important for what the Zohar does in the 13th century. So if you were to have translated Bereshit bara Elohim according to the words rather than the syntax, and you didn't know that Bereshit, because of this ungrammaticality, let us call it, is something like in the beginning, Rosh, right? Head, start, new, beginning. And you took it as the name of a god, Bereshit, that then created bara Elohim. And so since you don't want to suggest or open the possibility that there are two powers in heaven, right? Not a monotheism, but a system of two gods, a dualism, right? Then you want to make sure that you translate Bereshit as a word and not as a name. Good? Good. Okay. We're not going to read all this, everybody, but the Zohar, right, of the 13th century does exactly what the Talmud says the 72 Jews operating and translating under Ruach HaKodesh did not do. Okay, so I'm just going to show you in this spherotic tree. In the beginning, right, or with the beginning, the unknown concealed one, that's this, right, nothingness, the unknown concealed one created this. Okay, I'm going to say that differently now. But what the Zohar is doing at the very beginning is saying that Elohim, the Elohim that is described, that is featured, that is this one of the stars anyway of the Hebrew Bible, is not God. Don't confuse God with Elohim. Elohim is a creation of God that represents an aspect of God in the Torah. The way the Zohar is explaining that radical idea that the literary character of God is not to be confused with God is to read that into the language of the Bible as it maps on to the spherotic tree of the Zohar, where chokhmah, wisdom, is also a name that Reshit is also a name for chokhmah. In the beginning is wisdom, Reshit chokhmah, from the book of Proverbs, and that it is through this force that really is the divine force that is above, beyond, behind, within everything. So it is through Bereshit, right, this aspect of God, that Elohim was created. Now, the important part of all this for our discussion today is that we already have, in the 13th century, as close to an explicit admission as we're going to get in the pre-modern period, that the God of the Hebrew Bible should not be confused with God, with the divine. There is far more to divinity than the characters associated with the different names for God appear in how they appear in the Bible. Okay. I've been working for half a century to articulate what could simply be called a Judaism for adults living in freedom. So this is a little bit of Art's CV. You can see when he was born. He is now over 80, going to be 85. An undergraduate at Brandeis. After he was ordained at JTS, went back to Brandeis as a graduate student and worked on a dissertation about Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, the Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson. And then he taught at the University of Pennsylvania, left there to start becoming the dean of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, went back to Brandeis, where I worked with him, and then left Brandeis to found the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College. So he is the founding dean. And he's no longer associated with the college, but he has been in and out of the rabbinical training world and the academic world his entire life. So he has one foot in each of those worlds, and that was really what attracted me to work with him. Somebody who had total academic credibility and is the scholar of Hasidism, or one of the few scholars in the leading Jewish theologian, and someone who really speaks from a place of Jewish spirituality and Jewish mysticism from within their own neshama.
And before you go on, just a quick question. Is he from a Hasidic heritage, or did he kind of adopt the Hasidic heritage?
So yeah, great question. Thank you, Ari. And you're absolutely welcome to interrupt me with questions that you see coming in anytime. Really, feel free to interrupt me. So Art's dad was an atheist. Art's Art really grew up with a set of atheist socialist parents in Paterson, New Jersey. But when he spent time with his grandfather, right, he was introduced to a more traditional world, not Hasidic in particular. He went to Camp Ramah, so he was part of the conservative movement's camping as a kid. Um, but really, he was introduced to Hasidism as a college student and later on. And that was and really one of the people who first turned him on to Hasidism is a man named Hillel Zeitlin, which Art ended up doing some translation and some writing about Hillel Zeitlin. And that's what got him turned on to Hasidism. So he didn't grow up with it. He really grew up in a world that straddled atheism and socialism, and a more traditional side that he experienced with his grandfather. Not so unlike Martin Buber, actually, who also grew up in a secular environment, but when he went back to his grandfather, he was exposed to Hasidism in a more traditional setting. Okay. So in the last two sessions, it was important to explain what motivated Kaplan and Heschel to write for the audiences that they did and in the way that they did. And they were trying to break down or break apart these idols of modernity. With art, it's not an urge to break idols, it's a lament. I have stood by watching sadly as three generations of Jewish seekers, in much larger numbers, have turned away from our native tradition and sought to sink spiritual roots elsewhere, primarily in the gardens nurtured by teachings flowing from the East. I always carry such seekers in my heart when I write, partly because I feel myself to be one of them. Even though I did not make the journey eastward, I shared their sense of disappointment with the Judaism that we had once been taught. And so what Art is trying to do is to teach a different kind of Judaism that wasn't taught in Hebrew school, that wasn't taught at JTS when he went there for rabbinic ordination. And in part, even though Art Green learned with Heschel, right? Heschel didn't teach Hasidism at JTS publicly. He only taught it to a handful of students in his office as an independent study. The acceptance of Hasidism and Jewish mysticism as part of a legitimate component of a Jewish thought education awaited the 1980s until after Heschel's death. This is one of Art's latest books, Judaism for the World. The books that I have up here, I will tell you if I think they are worthy of your time or not. I'm also going to be giving a bibliography for all three of the authors, and Ari will post that as he does at the end of the series. Okay, little bit of terminology. So pantheism is a term that people are familiar with. It means that God and the world are identical. There is no margin beyond which God exists outside of the material world. Panentheism right? You've got that N there, panentheism, is the belief that the world is contained within God. So that's like pantheism, but there's a margin, and that God is more than the world. God transcends the world that we know, and God is immanent within the world. And so this is my writing. All right, this is from a book that I wrote called Coherent Judaism, where I'm describing arts theology. So, like Heschel, Green unfolds his personal theology from his own sense of awe, wonder, and radical amazement, terms all taken from Heschel. Yet, unlike Heschel, who seems to insist that we have all had these flashes of mystical insight, Green's more modest claim is that we all have potential for such experiences. He describes himself as a neo-Hasidic mystical panentheist. That's a mouthful. A neo-Hasidic, right? It's because he's not part of that Hasidic world. He's egalitarian. He doesn't have a problem with homosexuals. He is not Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Kashrut at the same level as the Hasidic community is. And he's a mystical panentheist. So with this description, he telegraphs the pedigree of his thought. Yes, he is heir to the mystical panentheism of Chabad and Rav Kook, but he's not struggling to keep assimilationist forces at bay. That dam has burst, and part of Green's neo-Hasidism is the acceptance of the fruits of academic research into history, the development of the Torah, into the evolution of halakhah and science. And I wrote my dissertation with art on Jewish responses to Darwinism. And so that's something that I was comfortable writing with Art Green, because he does not think that the world was created in 7 days and is less than 10,000 years old, as most of the Chabad folks do. So Green is ready to reframe what scientists tell us about the nature of reality into religious myth, as opposed to saying that it's history or science the way we understand those terms. And here is his credo: there is only one. All exists within what we humans call the mind of God, where being is simple, undifferentiated. Because God is beyond time, that reality is never changed. Our evolving, ever-changing cosmos and the absolute stasis, right? The static, never-changing quality of being are two faces of the same one. So I'm going to put this in different terms. From our perspective, we see this Heraclitus, you never step in the same river twice, everything is moving, everything is dynamic. And that's true from our perspective. But everything is an undifferentiated, simple, unified whole. There is no change. And so that's part of an inheritance from medieval Kabbalah, from Lurie, whose name is more well known than Moshe Cordovero, and that's really who this idea comes from. As this Kabbalistic idea has been filtered through Hasidic theology. Okay, we're going to talk more about this, but this is the beginning of the credo. Okay, here we go. This is the Jewish Publication Society's anthology of art's best writings. Very much recommended. So what's on top is a description from one of Art's academic articles on Hasidism. At the psychological, devotional root of this entire complex of theological ideas stands the experience, right? Mysticism a personal experience. Existentialism, the idea that we can't know what's out there, we can only know what exists in our mind. So at the root of this entire complex of ideas stands the experience of the negation or the transcendence of self. In Hasidic terminology, it's bitul hayesh, the nullification of our ego. And once we go through that experience to nullify our ego, we discover in the wake of that experience that it's only God that remains. Who remains? Not easy. Theology is not easy. But this is the essential claim of mystics, regardless of their religious tradition. And this is presented in the language that is particular to Hasidism. So this is now in his own theological writings. Our seeming existence as individuals, as separate, differentiated individuals, like all of physical reality, is the result of tzimtzum. And how is he going to translate this? A contraction or de-intensification of divine presence so that our minds can encounter it and yet continue to see ourselves as separate in order to fulfill our worldly task. In other words, for Art Green, as for Hasidism, tzimtzum is psychological. It's this idea that we are able to perceive reality in two different ways. Our normal perception of reality is that I'm separate from everything else and everybody else, right? And that's how I need to live for our worldly task. But we can also be trained to perceive the unity and the wholeness of the divinity of the world. In ultimate reality, however, that separate existence is mostly illusion. Adonai Echad, God is one, means that there is only one, not that there is, right? It's not a statement of monotheism. Adonai Echad doesn't mean that there's only one God. It means that there's only one thing, God. God is one means that there is only one and that we are all one. We are all one unified, and we are all part of that unity of the divine. Okay. A little more from me, okay? And then I'm quoting Art here. This is a more recent picture. Since the being, right, the divinity that flows through all finite separate beings is infinite, it links and unites all seemingly separate beings. Here, Green is conveying the Hasidic understanding of tzimtzum, which is psychological rather than ontological. Now, this is Art. The illusion of cosmic fragmentation, separation, and distance from God is a gift given to the human mind in order to enable us to engage in the labors of restoration, in the holy work of seeing the unity within the seeming separate aspects of reality. Primarily for Art, that's through recognizing the divinity of the other, of other people. Okay, now we're going to take a little sidebar into the world of tzimtzum, and we're going to talk about ontology and epistemology and these words that that scare my undergraduate students. But there are there are more, but we're going to look at three different meanings of this word tzimtzum.
Before we go on, there's a bunch of questions by people asking, how is this different from Buddhist theology? What you just outlined about understanding the world, where you fit in, and that you are really part of something bigger. It seems very much similar to those Eastern religions that he's either obviously and intentionally tying into, or that our tradition is connected to as well.
Yeah. Yes, agreed. And Hillel Zeitlin was a scholar of Buddhism before he became a Baal Tshuva, again in Warsaw. Um, how Judaism differs from Buddhism is that what we just talked about in terms of the unity and the illusion is all there is to Buddhism. There's not that flip side of the mitzvot that still charges us with raising these sparks, with trying to see and bring together the divinity that inheres in each separate aspect of reality. So there's a kind of defeatism or a resignation or an acceptance of reality in Buddhism that does not appear in Judaism. So since the question was asked, I will just remind people of one of the differences in the founding myths. If you think about the Buddha and you think about Moses, both of them go out of the palace. Both of them go out of their privileged upbringing and surroundings. And they both see misery and they both see suffering and they both see the oppression of human beings. Buddha says, oh, that's what reality is. Accept it. Moses says, oh, I'm going to kill the Egyptian taskmaster who is beating on the Hebrews, right? So within Buddhism, there's an acceptance of the reality. And within Judaism, there is a fight to the bitter end in order to protect those who are vulnerable to that kind of suffering in this world. It's kind of an amazing way to juxtapose Buddhism and Judaism because they have the same halves, the same beginnings of their origin stories and such different endings. Ari, anything else before I jump back into Tzimtzum?
Not for now, thanks.
Okay. So there are three models of Tzimtzum. I think this is where we left off. Slideshow from current slide. Can you guys see that? Ah, okay. What did I just do? Okay. All right, let me try this again from the top. I'm getting there, everybody. Sorry.
Just a reminder that this is a Theology Thursday program, which is a trademark of CSP. You have Taco Tuesday. This is Theology Thursday. And we're giving Rabbi Shai just an opportunity to find the lecture. Sorry that I interrupted and then you lost that. So I'll take the blame for it. Okay,
All right,
there you
we
go.
good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just gotta make it full screen. Yeah.
Yep, working on it. Slideshow from current slide. There we go. All right. So Isaac Luria is the guy. He didn't invent the term. He popularized it for Jewish mysticism. And when Isaac Luria uses the word Tzimtzum, he really means it. And that word really is what ontology means, right? Ontology is the study of what is real, the nature of reality, right? The study of being. So for Isaac Luria, God's withdrawal from metaphysical space in order to create that which is not God explains why bad stuff happens in the world. Because God isn't present in the world in strong enough force, right? With such potency or omnipotency that God is able to, that the powers of divinity are able to affect reality. That then is our task to enhance the divine sparks that remain in the world after God's contraction or withdrawal in order to empower divinity and goodness and righteousness and compassion in this world. That's the process of tikkun. That's Isaac Luria. By the time we get to the 18th century, that idea has changed because there's an acceptance of the Kabbalistic axiom that if God wasn't present in the world, there wouldn't be a world. There has to be, right? This world has to be completely God filled. So within the first transformation of Tzimtzum, this idea of withdrawal or contraction, in the world of Hasidism, that's where Art Green is getting his theology, that God has camouflaged himself so that we're not overwhelmed by divinity. What our task is then to become aware of God's real presence behind the appearance of seeming separation. The Mitnagdim, or the Misnagdim, um, the Vilna Gaon, Reb Chaim of Gaon. There is a misperception that they are not Kabbalists, that the Hasids are Kabbalists, and that the Misnagdim are not Kabbalists. That is absolutely wrong. It's actually kind of the other way around. But what the Gaon of Vilna says is that absolutely that there is this that the world is in illusion and that God is all that there is, but we, with our human brains, with our human minds, there's no way for us to perceive and to pierce that barrier the way that Hasidism says you can have an awareness of the divine. Our our the tools that we have, the frame, the framework that we have in our minds is unable to perceive the divinity of the world with the single exception of Talmud Torah. The only way that we can experience anything of the divine in this world is not through prayer, is not through eating, is not through drinking, is not through music, is not through dancing, the way that Hasidism says and lives, but it's through Talmud Torah. That is the keyhole or the portal through which divinity and humanity can meet. And that is the only portal through which divinity and humanity can meet. So if you want to know the difference between Hasidism and between Hasidim and Misnagdim, right? You can look at how they dress, and good luck trying to remember, who's a Hasid and who's a Misnagid. And now, of course, they've come much closer. But initially, in the late 18th century, this was the theological barrier between the two groups. I hope that was helpful. Okay. This is Art's masterpiece. This is Art's God in Search of Man by Heschel. This is Art's Star of Redemption by Rosenzweig. Rethinking God and Tradition, Radical Judaism, is the statement, the most complete statement that Art Green makes in order to understand how he understands Judaism to have gotten to where we are and how he understands Judaism today. So here we go. Green intuits, right? It's his mind, it's his perception, it's his awareness, that everything that exists shimmers with a divine vitality which is cloaked by the kaleidoscopic cascade of evolutionary history. Green's panentheism posits an underlying and integrating unity of the divine and the cosmos, which posits two things: transcendence within immanence and the mysterious synergy of the one. And this is now Art. Transcendence means that God or being is so fully present in the here and now of each moment that we could not possibly grasp the depth of that presence. It spills over. There's a divine margin to every experience that we have. And being is mysteriously and infinitely greater than the sum of its parts and cannot be fully known or reduced to its constituent beings. And he's got a beautiful way of saying this, as we'll see, involving the name of God. So if what exists is divine, then creation is revelation. As we see the creation around us, and if everything that exists is divine, then creation is revelation. The ongoing self-disclosure is the result of a deep and mysterious inner drive. He's talking about the history of evolution, the direction of evolution. The force of being directed from within, however imperfectly and stumblingly, to manifest itself ever more fully in ever more diverse, complex, and interesting ways, right? So this is really the closest that art gets to dealing with evolution, biological evolution, in this creation theology. That has caused it to bring about, it meaning evolution, in the long and slow course of its evolution, the emergence of a mind, that's us, that can reflect upon the process, articulate it, and strive toward the life of complete awareness that will fulfill its purpose. So God's purpose, according to art, is for all of the seeming discrete, individual, separate components of the divine to attain the complete awareness that we are part of this divine. So our first task as religious people is awareness of the divinity of reality, and the corollary to that first mitzvah, that first task, is to help bring others to that same awareness. For decades, with slightly different formulations, Green has promoted awareness as the first mitzvah. The obligation to become and to remain aware of divine presence is the foundation of all religious life. So theology is awareness of the reality of God as one and nothing else besides God. Religion is now what we do with that awareness. What we do is religion, right? What God is, or what our understanding of God is theology. So although Green dismisses the intrinsic value of any individual ritual within Judaism, he understands and deeply appreciates their function. I am suggesting that the creation of such ritual forms is indeed our human response to an authentic single mitzvah, a divine imperative of the immanent presence, a wordless calling forth within us that says, know me, wake up, be aware. I am Yud-He Vav-He, your God. Through that awareness, once we are awake and alive to that, then a response is creating rituals to help remind us and reinforce that awareness. This, of course, is referencing God's first question to humanity in the Garden of Eden. And since the Garden of Eden in the Torah isn't about a guy a long time ago, it's about the relationship between humanity and the divine. So I am suggesting that the silently spoken divine, where are you? Notice it's silently spoken, is the essence of revelation. God says to Adam, where are you in the Garden of Eden? Art is saying that all of us hear that, not from outside ourselves, but from inside ourselves. Where are we? To be a religious human being is to recognize that call and seek to respond to it. To be aware, to attain the deepest understanding we can of the evolving oneness of being, and to live in faithfulness to that awareness. How do you say faithfulness in Hebrew? Emunah, the same word for faith, right? The two commandments that lie within the where are you, which is addressed to every person, is become aware and share that awareness. And this is now what Art has recently added on. In our age, these two mitzvot are joined by a third: protect my earth, save it from destruction. And the way I would phrase this is make sure, not make sure, ensure that our children and grandchildren can continue to be aware. And without protecting the earth and the environment, there won't be a platform, there won't be an environment, there won't be a world in which they can maintain that awareness of God. Okay. And now he's going to talk about the reward. To open yourself to serve others as a channel of divine grace, to bring light and blessing into their lives is endlessly rewarding. The more light you shine forth, the more comes pouring through. The inner wellspring is one whose waters do not betray. It's a verse from Jeremiah, I think, or Psalms, I think Jeremiah, and never run dry. This is all I have by way of faith and reward, and it is plenty. So in other words, a religion for adults doesn't depend on winning the lottery or not having your wife or your mother get a bad diagnosis of breast cancer, right? That is the way of the world. And praying for such things to happen, right? That's not going to be fulfilled, and it's not going to be fulfilling, right? This idea of tapping into being aware and having emerged the light of the divine and having that light meet with another light that is mysteriously synergistic, that's the reward, right? Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. One mitzvah drags on another mitzvah, and schar mitzvah mitzvah. And the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. Okay. So let me see how we're doing on time. 1:48. Okay, I think I'm going to do this very quickly so that we have plenty of time for questions. This is what Art does with the name of God and rearranging the name of God for the Hebrew word for existence or being. So Green's interpretation of God's ineffable name, Yud He Vav He, involves a conflation of the three temporal time senses of the verb to be: was, is, and will be. This is what he says. God's name is a verb that has been artificially arrested in motion and made to function as a noun. Green repeatedly makes the point that the four-letter name of God with the letters rearranged is the Hebrew word for being or existence, havaya. All beings are somehow manifestations of the same single being. When you think of those beings as individuals, they collectively make up existence and are havaya. But when you change perspectives and think of them as the one, they open to an infinite mystery, a dimension that was not seen before, and that havaya becomes Yud He Vav He. These books are earlier iterations of Art's Kabbalistic theology. They're interesting, but you can read more current things. Okay. I do a whole piece on Agam that we're not going to do right now. And this is really where I wanted to end and then have time to take questions. So here what I've tried to do is to pedagogically lay out the different aspects that we've spoken about over the past 3 weeks, give you a chart that compares Kaplan, Heschel, and Green, and to really show you the distance that art has come from both Kaplan, who founded the movement that art was then the president of the Reconstructive Rabbinical College, and as a student of Heschel, also moved from Heschel's more personal relationship to God to very much a kind of panentheism and an impersonal force that is filtered through our own personal psychology and relates and is relatable to in individual ways, but not as a force that can personally reach into the mix and change things according to what we might call the divine will. So, what Green is arguing against is a kind of pediatric theology and the supernatural. What did I do? There we go. And in terms of where to find God, it's very similar to Heschel's sense that we all have this intuitive preconceptual faculty, and then using that potential to try to see and become aware that the world is overflowing with God's presence, especially within other humans who are God's images. And redemption, I think we'll end here. Redemption for Green is for everyone to arrive at this complete awareness of the divinity of the world and to treat one another accordingly. Okay. I'm going to stop the share and we've got some time for questions.
Thank you. Another deep Thursday of thinking before we go back to our mundane life. I see a question here. First of all, I mean, there was a point. People, I mean, I know you pointed out the difference between Arthur Green and Heschel, but they seem very close. I mean, much closer than Mordecai Kaplan. I mean, they are. Arthur Green is an evolution of Heschel, correct?
I think it's easy to say that and to see that, but temperamentally, he's also very close to Kaplan because Kaplan accepted biblical criticism without any hedging. Kaplan was arguing against supernaturalism without any hedging. And so that kind of transnaturalism and acceptance of biblical criticism that Kaplan really promoted, it was never comfortable for Heschel and for Art Green, who's the only one of the three who was born in America, completely at home within this cultural milieu, right? He, I think, temperamentally was close to Kaplan, but his theology, right, which is based on this idea of being captivated by a sense of awe and wonder, right? That is an extension of Heschel.
Okay, thank you. I see a question here about the role of the soul in Art Green's theology.
Yeah.
And where it comes
So,
from, where it goes, heaven, things
yeah.
like that.
So I don't think that art specifically addresses the difference between a body and a soul and what happens to the soul upon death. In that, right, for that, Brad Artson is somebody who really tries to deal with the anthropology issue, with human beings as an integrated body and soul. That's less of art's concern. Um, I don't remember art writing about an afterlife particularly. Um, I think that as with most mystics, there's an understanding that what our energy that animates our being is upon death, it goes back into the ocean of energy in which we had once been a discernible, distinct wave. But that wave has crashed, and now we just go back into the large ocean of being. Something along those lines.
Okay. Um, There's a question about, so you studied with art, but your relationship, is it as a mentor with respect to writing, or do you also discuss like philosophy of life? And then the related question is, what practice does Art Green say, or does he espouse in relation to his theology to help you become more aware and connected to God?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that art is particularly sympathetic to rituals and practices in terms of meditation. Um, he's written about that quite a bit. Rich, I think that there's a way to reconceptualize, and Kabbalah and Hasidism has done that for us, to reconceptualize a lot of the rituals that we have inherited in ways that enhance our awareness of the divine. And ethics is front and center for our brain. Um, he he's not really advocating a different set of practices. I think that when he says the first two commandments, be aware and share that awareness, are then supplemented by protect Earth, that's a call for environmental sensitivity. But he is not one to issue new laws, right? The halakhah was not where art found spiritual nourishment in the tradition. And as far as, I spent 6 years with art as a graduate student, certain mentor certainly helping me uh, write and think through the history of Jewish thought and theology. And also, I would challenge him and he would respond. And, in terms of our different theologies, in my book, I say that I don't really understand the idea of transcendence within immanence. I I have no doubt that art understands it, but at least with that formulation, that is not helpful for me to understand what he's getting at. So, I would say that I'm a junior colleague. So there are, Brad Artson and Art Green, and there really aren't that many other folks who are trying to straddle this world of an academic appreciation for the history of Jewish thought and then trying to express it in a way that lands with 21st century Jews who have accepted biblical criticism, who've accepted Darwinian evolution, who no longer are comfortable talking about a soul that is separate from a body. Um, Brad Artson, Rabbi Artson, talks about kind of the Casper the ghost model. Um, I don't use that terminology, but I also believe that there is that there is not a surviving soul that has an independent existence after we die.
Deep stuff for today. I guess last two that we can get to. Number one, how much has this theology now penetrated, from your perspective, contemporary younger Jews, rabbis who are studying at Hebrew college? I mean, is this theology that you share with us, is it popular from what you've seen? Is it esoteric and not? Is it something that where is it in the world of Judaism today?
Yeah. So Hebrew College, the rabbinical school there, is doing relatively well compared to the denominational rabbinical schools. Um, there is, I think that people wouldn't go to the Hebrew College Rabbinical School unless they felt an affinity toward arts theology. And as they continue their careers in pulpits and off pulpits, I think that this idea of mystical panentheism will become increasingly common in the Jewish community. and the talk and the prayers to a more supernatural interventionist God will become increasingly less.
I see the T-shirt, Neo-Hasidic Mystical Panentheist. I think that's an NMP, right?
We can work on the acronym.
Okay. So last question. People were very upset that you skipped over the art piece with
Mm,
Agam.
Agam.
Can you, in like 1 minute, just tell us what you were gonna say, and then maybe
Yeah.
we could do a more detailed thing some other time. But and then we'll
Okay.
then we'll wrap it up.
So Agam means lake, right? And the surface of the lake is always moving. Agam changed his name. It used to be Rock, right? It was something Steen, right? Which is rock in German. And what you identify as quintessentially Agam is called kinetic art. What is kinetic art? It means either that the art itself is moving, like the fountain in the middle of Tel Aviv at Dizengoff, or you have to physically move in order to see the totality of the artwork. This is very conscious on Agam's part that any particular snapshot of reality is an incomplete picture of reality, right? That you need time and you need movement in order to capture the whole, and that what we call a snapshot of a moment is an idol, and that we shouldn't ever confuse a moment of reality for reality itself. And he's trying to capture that in his different versions of kinetic art.
Terrific. Thank you. I will mention that one of our earlier guests that we brought to Orange County years ago was Arthur Green, and he was terrific. I mean, it was an incredible weekend. I believe he spoke at Congregation B'nai Israel and at a CSP event. It was really, there is a presence about him. That's all I will say. Um, you know, so that was number one. We also hosted Art Green for a program that we recorded on CSP. So in the follow-up, we'll share all the usual materials, and I'll try to find these interviews because I think it's important for people to hear Art Green speak in his voice. Although your voice is
Agreed.
excellent as well, and I think your presentation was terrific today. Thank you so much. So I want to wish you a great rest of the summer and Mazel Tov on your oldest, becoming an Israeli this week. So
Yeah, my daughter became Israeli yesterday, 23 years old.
what a time, right?
Right.
So, as a parent, I'm sure some sleepless nights, but Mazel Tov on that, and looking forward to hearing from my kid and your kid about Camp Ramah. I guess they'll be coming back next week. Anything else you want to share in the wrap up here?
Thanks, everybody. I know it's not easy stuff, and the bibliography that Ari will be sharing will give you places to go for more information that you can sit with the material. And I think it really is worth dwelling in and marinating in because it's rich stuff that has, at least for me, really enriched my appreciation for Jewish theology and for life. For life.
Thank you. Thank you for enriching all of us. Take care, everybody. Have a nice rest of your Thursday and a great Shabbat. Nice seeing you,
Bye.
Phyllis Gilmore. Bye bye, guys. Hi, Mike Rubin.